thank you very much for coming. As Simone said, I'm Mitch Owens. I'm the American editor of the World of Interiors, and I'm very happy to be joined today with our panelists from far to near, Christophe de Kennetin, antique dealer and art historian, who has a beautiful booth here. Benni Frowein, the CEO of Schumacher, who, as Simone said, was gladly provided us with this beautiful backdrop, which is all about pattern and ornament. And Jennifer Olshin of Friedman, Benda, also with a wonderful booth here over in the contemporary art section. I'm going to presume, since everyone is here, you're all fans of pattern and ornament, which seems to be what TEFAF is certainly all about. Beauty, for me at least, is a combination of pattern and ornament, and I find it very difficult to believe anyone who doesn't like either of them. As Simone said, when we first started developing the thoughts around this conversation, she reminded me of Adolf Loos's 1908 essay, Ornament and Crime, which if you haven't read, you should, and if you do, you'll be outraged. I don't see how anyone could not like ornament at all. Lois talked about ornament being a disease, and so much so that he couldn't bring himself to buy a gingerbread cookie that had a pattern on it. He only bought the smooth kind. And I thought, what could be more delightful than eating a piece of gingerbread in the shape of a windmill? But he was against that. But so I'd like to start out a bit about ornament and pattern with our colleague Jennifer Olshin, because I don't think that we necessarily think of pattern and ornament in terms of contemporary art. And I know in our preliminary discussions before our panel happened, I've found myself wandering TEFAF, looking at contemporary artists who have fully embraced the idea of ornament and pattern.
Yes, I think that many contemporary designers and artists do embrace it, but they don't embrace it in a way, they've kind of commandeered the whole notion of it, and it kind of has transformed itself, and it's not always for the same. I guess the intention is what's interesting in contemporary design. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, the functionality of ornament is in a completely different context, or can be in a different context, right? So the first thing I think about in terms of the designers that we work with is a Dutch designer called Joris Laarman, and people may or may not know him in the room. He's a significant designer in many ways, a very cutting edge, innovative thinker. And the first thing I thought about when we were having this conversation is his graduate thesis in school at Eindhoven. And his graduate thesis is called Reinventing Functionality. So here you have pretty much one of the most cutting edge designers working today, working with technology, working with scientists, professors. It created a way to 3D print metal in space using very advanced ideas and integrating disciplines of our day, right? And his thesis was called Reinventing Functionality. And what it was a heat wave. It was called the heat wave radiator. And it's a radiator that it's Rococo. It's a Rococo form. It's a radiator that spreads across a vast area of the wall and even turns so it kind of embraces the wall. And it's all these swirls. It swirls, and it looks like an ancestor of a Rococo wall ornament of some sort. And the idea was that he really put forward that ornament can be friends with function, and it can even serve to further it, because as a straight piece on the wall, it would be less interesting, but not only less interesting, it would waste heat, right? So by going like this, you can spread the heat along the wall and in the room in a much more functional way. So in fact, the curves and the sinuousness and the ornament, if you will, was providing greater function. So that's the first thing that I thought of. I mean, there are many other examples in different ways with designers that we work with, but that was very clearly something to bring up, I thought.
But that's also what's interesting to me, is that he's a contemporary designer, contemporary artist, contemporary thinker, but whose work is reaching back over centuries to create something that's new, but at the same time not. And I think that's sort of the power of ornament. And I think, Benni, you, with the fabrics and textiles and wallpapers that Schumacher creates, they're contemporary works, very often rooted in the past.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I mean, I did a little bit of research and thought about, actually the type of ornaments and patterns we use or we see a lot in home. And my favorite fun fact, actually, that I found out, and I didn't know it before, I admit that, is that the paisley pattern, which originally came from Persia through India to the United Kingdom, was a very exclusive, only on scarves, and they took 2 to 3 years to be produced. So someone in the town of Paisley in Scotland then started weaving them also for the home on a jacquard loom and made them, as an approachable pattern. And the paisley, so I didn't know it was actually that paisley comes from Scotland. But, you see paisley, you see the Greek key, you see, chinoiseries, you see, actually, and what I love so much about it is that I think it's very similar to what you said. It's not a rule anymore that you need to, you can't mix, or all has to be in a home the same language you speak. It's actually, people mix modern and classic and, fabrics that are very patterful and, clean. So I think there's no rules anymore. And I think that is really interesting. So that's what I see a lot in home, that where I see the evolvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've seen through working with World of Interiors and other publications that I've worked with is that there's a great appreciation, let's say, over minimalism and maximalism operate on parallel tracks. One is maybe in the ascendant and one is maybe not at that moment, but they're never not in fashion. It's just whatever an editor or a magazine tends to produce more often. So I find that the ornamentation that we look at from 200 years ago, 300 years ago, it's still with us. It's still working with us. And I think that now we're certainly seeing an enormous amount of interest in ornamentation, in interior design in terms of color and pattern, ornament, silhouettes of furniture. There's a really great appreciation for want of a better word, exuberance and almost a sensuousness that is quite different from what you would think in a contemporary time period, the 21st century. I mean, we've gone so forward, but at the same time, we're pulling the past with us all the time and making it do new things. And I know that, Christoph, your booth is, this very livable, fun, colorful, romantic booth that looks back to the 1950s and the work of the French decorator Georges Geoffroy, but that's looking back even farther to the 18th century in France, and he was pulling that period through a 1950s lens.
Yes, completely. And Georges Geoffroy, this interior designer, has a passion for the ornament and in particular to the Greek ornament. So he was using it in the salon of Christian Dior, for example, with beautiful curtains, but the border of the curtains were Greek ornament. And it's true that in my field, the ornament is the key If the ornament is Rococo or neoclassical, it's not the question. Because all the people who has made the kind of stuff that I'm selling or study, so the big 18th century, the first things that these people were learning as to train, it was the ornament. And it's still the case. So when you are at the École Boulle nowadays, you have an ornament lesson, and you start by that. And after, you start by to learn how to carve, how to do a piece of furniture. So I really think that if you want to be a good artist or artisan, it's the base. You need to understand all the different kind of ornaments, for me.
You can't overcome ornament. It's always with us.
Yes, I think. And it's the key. And as Benni was saying, you could have different kind of style and ornament in a room. It works. The only good thing is the proportion for me. But you could have neoclassical with Rococo. It works. But the proportion needs to be the good one.
And what's lovely about that, I think, in mixing up those vocabularies, is that you're not really stuck with a template, because everything you like is going to be so individualistically appreciated that it won't look like somebody else's sort of mix master interior, because you're not looking for trophies. You're looking for sort of an atmospheric moment and appreciation of things. I know that one thing that Jennifer mentioned early on in our discussions, which surprised me because I had not thought of it, is the reverse of canvases, of contemporary artists pulling pattern and ornament to a side of a canvas you cannot see. And I found that really amazingly beautiful, because the idea of it being hidden.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in with painters for sure, and you also see it with designers. But I think that that goes back to another idea, which maybe is interesting here, is that, again, the function of a painting or an object can be more than just how can I use it as a mundane object, but maybe it's an object of contemplation. That's a function, right? Or maybe it's a spiritual thing. You know, we have one designer that literally, it's funny that you mentioned this, because we have one designer from Texas who lives in Detroit, and he has a studio of people that kind of like, it's almost like a medieval guild. It's a workshop of people, and they sit there, they all wear the same color when they're working on the same color piece. It's something you don't see that often today. And he likes to sometimes embed his own history in the pieces. So I had sold a cabinet, it was a few years ago in Miami, and he said, oh, that's the cabinet that has the picture of me as a little boy. And I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, I put it in there, in the interior of the cabinet.
Right.
And I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, because he had all kinds of reasons why he did that. But so I think that there's also, and that goes back to ornament bringing joy, ornament bringing, these are intangible things. Those are functions, in my opinion. That's a function. If it's a spiritual, or if it's, so if you can't see it, it doesn't mean that that's not of use to the person that owns it or the person that did it.
Because they'll come across it as a surprise and wonder. I mean, I think that's sort of the extraordinarily beautiful thing about ornament, is the fact that no matter how small the object is, no matter how complicated it is, or actually because of how complicated it is, ornament, the best ornament, allows you to get lost in a piece. You're not just looking at it from a distance. The Chinoiserie Gardens. You're constantly looking at the different birds and the different leaves. And I'm always looking at, wondering, what the quality of the soil is to grow the plants. And it creates its own narrative that seduces you in a way that something non-ornamented doesn't necessarily for me.
Yeah, and I mean, a very practical comment to that. 10 years ago, it was cost prohibitive for a lot of people to use, chinoiserie in their home because you really only could hand paint it. So you needed access to a painter, you needed the funds to paint, and a home for that. So since there's digital printing, you can actually digital print them because before, on a rotary, you need to have every 70 centimeters a vertical repeat. So you could only hand paint it, and that's it. And today now, since there's digital printing, you have a file and you can print it. So a lot more people can use it these days. And you live in a modern building and you want to create something, out of a very white box. It's an instant changer of a room, as we can see here. It's basically a black box, and you add a totally different character.
Right.
Especially with these beautiful flower bouquets with it. And I think all of that is ornamental.
Christophe, you had mentioned the école boule and the ornament, and people learning how to carve, learning how to paint, learning how to take these very traditional movements and vocabularies and techniques and bringing them into a modern world. I think that's one of the other things we forget about the vocabulary of ornament, is that it is really grounded in the past, and you have to bring it forward to make it new. So that ornament, to stay alive, you need artisans, you need people who are working on furniture and paintings, wallpaper, carpets, everything to keep all of this alive. I mean, I know Lois was complaining constantly about he would pay someone more to create a simple shoe than to create one with cutouts and little perforations. And I thought, but that's sort of negating the whole idea of how you get to ornamentation from A to B. You have these students who are learning how to carve volutes and scallops and all these other things, and bringing it into a new world, and then recreating it for all of us in a new way.
Yes, I agree with you, because when you see, for example, the ornament used in Versailles for Louis XIV, it's more or less the same ornament that the one used for the Empire style, and you arrive to something completely different with the same ingredients. So it's like cooking. You have the same agreement, but if you have talent and that you have assimilate really well the ornament, you could create something completely new and completely different from the past and the things which has been done. No, I really think it's the key of the creation for me, the ornament, and particularly not maybe in the sculpture decorative or the old master field, but in the decorative arts field. The good piece have the good ornament and the good proportion.
Jennifer, when you're working with your designers and artists at Friedman Benda, what are the conversations you have, if at all, about ornament and pattern and what they're creating and what you're going to be offering?
It's interesting because sometimes we do see the designers that veer more towards minimalism and those that are more maximalist, which has been almost a fashion in New York in the last. It's sort of a group of young designers in New York have embraced the notion of maximalism, and ornament obviously just flows into that in a very kind of not random, but a very free way, as if they took the Owen Jones's book and just took what they wanted. Owen Jones's book is already a kind of giant compendium, and then young designers will just take things completely without context and throw it in, which is super interesting in a lot of ways. But sometimes we do have, at an art fair or something, we try because everybody in our roster represents a new story. So we don't collect people in the gallery that look the same or that, that in any way repeat each other, or we try not to. It's not like I show a group of designers from one group. It's really different narratives and different parts of the world and different explorations. So when trying to put that all together, it can be challenging, because you do have some designers who just have fidelity to, and it's not ornament. It's more like a notion of simplicity, or there's an idea of Zen. It's not called like ornamentless, because those aren't sort of the conversations, but it is definitely like, how do you elicit a kind of serenity, if you will. But of course, I mean, with us, we know that ornament can also do that. It's just not the common. It's not the common idea that something like this could make you feel serene. But for me and for some of us, I'm sure it does, because it is a kind of sense of familiarity. It's a wonderment. It's an ability to look at something without a beginning and an end and enjoy it.
Right, exactly.
I think that's, you don't have to, it's that idea of change and continuity and exploration being a fun, interesting, and exciting idea, as opposed to being something that you get lost in or you can't control, which is, obviously shades of that in the book, in the essay, are everywhere. But it also struck me, I was looking at a little bit of his architecture before, a few days ago, and it struck me that if you kind of squint your eyes, there's pattern in his buildings.
Yes.
There is pattern. The shape of the windows, it's like, it's no different than going to, Morocco and seeing the traditional way the houses are built with the patterns of windows.
Right, pattern is always with. Well, it's also, he came back from America seeing the buildings of Louis Sullivan and talking about carrying this quote from Louis Sullivan back to Austria about the simplicity of buildings, and we need to create buildings that have a charming silhouette. And the first thing I think of when I think of Louis Sullivan is just endless ornament all over the place. And I thought, did you just edit what you saw when you were in the United States? I mean, focus on one particular building, and that said no ornament to you, and you ignored the rest of Sullivan's work. I know within each of you, within your particular genres and specialties, how do your clients react to ornament and pattern? I mean, are they completely on board with that? I mean, is there a feeling now that ornament is something greatly to be embraced and followed and effective in their lives?
Me, in my case, when a customer arrives and that he likes a piece, he has the first general look. He likes the piece or not, and if he likes the piece after the game, he's watching the ornament. And he said, "Oh, look at that! Look at this little leaf here! Look at," and so it's the second. They read the object at the beginning globally, and after they really get into details, and thanks to the ornament. And so at the end, I think in the French decorative art, it's the things that they try to find at the end.
It's very interesting that you say that, because also with Jennifer, what you said, it really depends on how far you zoom in or out in terms of whether you see ornament or not. You can see it in a facade, or you can look very closely at this fabric and you suddenly see a pattern. And it's very much the same in interior design. No, I mean, I think everything has to work with each other in a room, but normally you react first to a color. And then it's all about the discovery, and whether it is a weaving structure, or whether it's an ornament, or whether it's touching it and feeling it. If nothing of that was there, it would all fall flat. And then you have a white box in which I don't think any one of us, even the people that say they don't like ornament, would want to live, because it's not a human surrounding. It is very sharp. It's very cold. So. I think it really depends on how far or much you want to zoom in, whether you like more texture or more ornament that you see right away.
But it's very interesting what you are saying, because in Paris, for example, you have people who collect modern things, and they live in an Haussmannian building. So the interior is completely white and boring, but they always keep the corniche with the ornaments. But it's strange, they never put that off. They always keep this ornament. And you're right, because if it's only a box, it's the beginning of the end. It's not possible to live without any ornament. So they always keep, and I think it's completely inconscient. And, because it gives you peace in a room, I think.
I know the one thing when you were talking about painting like the white box, even when you see rooms full of 18th century boiserie and someone has come in and painted it all white, the ornament remains. I mean, it's there, it's omnipresent. It doesn't just become erased. It just gets a new color, a new coating, and you're constantly surrounded by the ornament. I know that a lot of the images that we're seeing behind us are things that we've all chosen, that we've liked, that show individual appreciations of pattern and ornament, and I think that what's really beautiful about what we've all chosen is there's subtle ornament and there's overt ornament, but there's never no ornament, and I think that's a really huge lesson in what you were talking about the white box. It's almost impossible to have no ornament. I mean, we've as human beings, it's been millennia. We love ornament and we love pattern. It's just how do we use it, and how do we make it of our age, if not a previous age or a future age.
And the ornament, I think, in a room give the rhythm and the movement of the room. It's without ornament, you don't have life at the end, and so it's when you see the wallpaper. We have a movement on this wallpaper, and it's the ornament. At the end, yes, the ornament it's a big road, and all around the room or all around a piece of furniture or a wall. So it's the life of the room for me.
I know that's the sort of the thing that I like so much about TEFAF in particular, is that every dealer, no matter how contemporary, has a real eye for ornament and pattern and richness. And that's sort of my joy in walking through the fair, is falling in love with something that says ornament either very softly or very loudly.
And we see that in all the section of TEFAF, because even when you go in the pictura section, for sure you have your paintings, but you have ornament in the frame. There's nothing more sad than paintings without a good framing, and a good framing, it's always with ornament. So it's true that at TEFAF you have ornament everywhere.
I think there's something within the human nature in our psyche that delights us about ornament, and I'm wondering if you might want to explore that for a moment from your own personal perspectives, but also from client perspectives.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it. I think ornament in a lot of times really takes you on a journey. You start dreaming. Chinoiserie, but is a European invention, 18th, 19th century, when people had a very romantic view of China, one very, very large country in peace and highly cultured and sophisticated. And and they came up with this view of it, and it was exotic, and you would take someone on a journey. And I think we all love fantasy and journey, and I think that is for me what a lot of ornament is about. Someone took a lot of time to build something, put all their fantasy in it, whether it's an artist, whether it's an artisan, and we can relive this journey several times, or every time we look at it. I find it a highly romantic view of it, actually.
I mean, ornament is escapism in a lot of ways. It's out of the white box of life, like clarity. We don't need clarity all the time. Sometimes we just want mystery and a dream, and I think that's what ornament allows us to do. Like you were saying, Christophe, someone coming in, appreciating the form of a piece of furniture, and then as we were talking about that music table that you have in the center of your main space, you suddenly start focusing on the silhouette of the piece and how it moves. And it's this plastic moment that changes every time you walk around it. And there's something really delightful about that, and beautiful and distracting, of like seeing someone you love in a different light, in a different shadow. Something new is always shown.
No, and you're right. It's the ornament. With the ornament, you escape, because when you start to watch an ornament, your eyes always move. You want the end of the story at the end, so you want to see how is it at the corner, and so it's a good definition. The ornament, with the ornament, we escape, and
if the ornament's good, there's no end to the story.
Yeah.
It just keeps going.
When you see Meissonier, for example, for the Rococo things, it's unbelievable. If you see the things that he has made in silver or the engraving that he has made, it's completely crazy. The ornament, it's an on-hand story.
Well, I think also what's amazing about being at TEFAF, if I may, is that you get these stories of ornament at the moment when it was new in some ways, right? So ornament is obviously translated down to the most popular, or culture, but you kind of start, if you start in looking at antiquities, for example, you see when they were like discovering that language, and then you see, for example, in your booth, when that moment when they were mixing, the past with 18th century and technology, right? So at each point there's a new type of technology that kicks in that also starts to change what the ornament looks like, because it becomes either easier to make, or you're making it by you're drawing it, or all the way up to today. Like when I work with designers, sometimes they come and say, I created this with AI and this machine and that thing, and every single time I always say to them, this looks like the machine made it. So I'm glad that this was easier for you to get here, but you need to go back and figure out where your hand is. And the greatest ones do come back, and the greatest ones use technology as a tool to enhance their own creativity, to iterate on ornament of the past.
Right.
So it's this kind of, what's so nice at TEFAF is that you see all of these stories when they were new, when it's very exuberant. It's a very, happy moment at each, some people say what, do you only look at contemporary? And I say, I look for the same criteria in every time period. I look for the exact same criteria. It happens to be my time period now, so I understand it differently. But that's what's amazing at TEFAF, is you see these stories from when they were first introduced, before it was then popularized.
Right. I think that's really an important thing to remember in looking at past time periods, past ornamentation, past styles, is that at that moment that object was made, it could not have been more modern. It could not have been more of the present. So if you look at TEFAF, or if you look at the antiques that are here, the art, you're constantly looking at new things. You just need to put yourself in that moment when it was shocking, and they all were at certain moments.
Yeah, and you go back to your normal life, and you suddenly, pull more references to what you just seen, to what surrounds you. I think that's also pretty amazing.
Right, so it's a continuum.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank very much Christophe and Benni and Jennifer for joining me here today with you all.